Alright, so today I'll be talking about the Battle of Lutzen, which was a major turning point in the 30 Years' War. So the battle was fought in 1632 by the Swedish army and the Holy Roman Empire, who I'll call the Imperialists for short. And to make things fair, I call the Swedish Swedes for short. So as you may know, Lutzen was a major battle in the 30 Years' War, which did last 30 years from 1618 to 1648, and really happened because a bunch of guys weren't happy about something, and it ended up being a war, as it always is. So right now I won't explain all the causes, but I'll probably do that another time. Alrighty, so there are a number of generals I should probably mention before we get to the battle. The one thing you'll notice though is that all of them have a goatee and mustache, which I suppose was the big fashion thing back then. So for the Swedes, King Gustavus Adolphus commands the army. While he was charismatic and had great tactical skill, he was actually prone to violent mood swings, and it was his overconfidence that led him to lose previously at the Battle of Alta Veste. Second in command of the Swedish army is Duke Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar, who's just like there, you know. Next is General Dodo von Nipphausen, who commands the second line in the Swedish center. He has a very interesting name, I should say. There is also General Niels Brahe, but I couldn't really find a picture of him, unfortunately. The Imperials are commanded by Albrecht von Wallenstein. Wallenstein is a very good general, but his personality was pretty much like a big jerk, which makes it really hard for people to work with him. He was really all in it for himself, and this makes the Holy Roman Emperor really suspicious of him, and later on it leads to bad stuff. Wallenstein's left-wing commander is General Heinrich von Holk, who actually fought against the Habsburgs in the Danish part of the 30 Years' War, but ended up in the Imperial army. Commanding the right wing is General Rodolfo di Colloredo, who was an Italian general. I don't really know that much about him, but I mean that's alright. General Ottavio Piccolomini doesn't really command a major sector of the Imperial army, but his name just kinda sounds cool, so I just put him on there, you know. Ottavio Piccolomini. Last but not least is Imperial Cavalry Commander Count Gottfried Heinrich von Pappenheim. Infamously, he charged the Swedish right wing at Breitenfeld and failed pretty badly. At Lützen, Pappenheim commands a small force, which was not at the start of the battle, but may or may not arrive later. I can't really spoil it for you. Now, before we talk about the battle, I should probably explain some things about the battle tactics of the 1600s. Don't worry, it'll be quick though, and I won't go too deep into it, but hopefully this should give you a better grasp of how the Battle of Lutzen went, and how both armies fought, and what sort of tactics they used. So the big thing for the infantry was that there were two classes of them. First was musketeers, then were pikemen. So the musketeer is the picture of the guy on the left. So as you probably can infer, they were armed with muskets, typically arquebuses or matchlock muskets, where you actually just light the fuse and wait for the spark to reach the powder pan. The musketeer has a bandolier with 12 shots on it. That was called the 12 Apostles. If you ran out of ammunition, you would just pick some up from a dead guy. Pikemen were heavily armored and had pikes that were really, really long, sometimes up to 16 feet. And these were primarily used against cavalry, sometimes against infantry. And you may wonder why pikes. Well, this was before the bayonet was invented, which combined musket and pike 2 and 2 for greater efficiency. Now, the imperial armies of the age used a tactic called a tercio, which originated in Spain. And as you may know, the Habsburg dynasty ruled both Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. So the Imperials used the Spanish tactics as well. So, you know, same family, same tactics, you know, that kind of stuff. Anyway, the tercio was also served as a organizational basis, as well as a military tactic, sort of like the regiment on the organizational terms. So essentially, a tercio was just a massive blob of pikemen and musketeers, put simply, if you want to take it like that. But this and previous imperial tactics had failed pretty badly at the Battle of Breitenfeld, which led to Wallenstein reforming his army to be a combination of both traditional imperial and Swedish tactics. Now, the Swedish army was mostly comprised of Germans rather than Swedes or Finns, as you may imagine. They weren't quite mercenaries, but more like military contractors who were hired to raise their own private armies and fight for someone. This was the same for the Imperials as well, but what set the Swedish contractors really over the Imperials was that the Swedish method of training and their battle doctrine. So the Swedish tactics were based on the Dutch model, which was much more flexible than the tercio, as Maurice of Nassau, who was very influential in the Dutch army, fought a lot against the tercio, so he had his own set of tactics that he would use effectively against them. For the artillery, the Imperials just had all these assorted cannons. They were very immobile. They weren't very organized. As you can see on the PowerPoint, they were run by guilds, so there was very little organization to them. The Swedes, though, were kind of the opposite. They had highly organized artillery, they had set calibers, their rate of fire was very high and very mobile. Gustavus himself experimented a lot with artillery. Infamously, he invented the leather gun, which was literally a gun made out of leather, so he was hoping that it could be lighter, but it kind of failed. But that gives you an idea of how much the Swedes sort of played around with the whole concept of lighter artillery. For the cavalry, the Imperials used a maneuver called a caracal, where all the cavalry would just march up to the enemy and shoot off their pistols. The Swedish were more in favor of charging with swords for an increased shock effect, and this whole shock effect thing really plays into Swedish tactics, because there was an infantry tactic called the Swedish salve, where 3 ranks in a line would fire simultaneously, rather than each line firing and reloading in succession. And so that's the gist of it, but you have to understand that tactics are far more complex than whatever I just said. So on the morning of November 6, 1632, Gustavus has 13,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 cannons against Wallenstein's 10,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry, and 38 cannons at the start of the battle. Pappenheim commands 2,000 cavalry and 3,000 infantry, but we don't know if he's gonna show up yet or not, so I'll just leave it at that. Just to clarify things, the units on the diagrams don't specifically represent any sort of tactical grouping, they're just there to help simulate the battle. Alright, so the battlefield of Lützen was generally featureless except for 3 important places. These 3 features all favor the Imperialists in that they are on the defensive for this battle. The first is the town of Lützen down in the southwest, garrisoned by 400 musketeers. The second is the adjacent Windmill Hill, where a powerful Imperial battery of 13 cannons were deployed. Lastly is a large road which spanned the expanse of the battlefield, and this road was aligned with a ditch which Wallenstein had turned into entrenchments lined with about 400 musketeers. While the Imperial right was well positioned, the left was unsupported by any natural or man-made feature. Wallenstein actually expected Gustavus to attack the fortified right wing, while the arrival of Pappenheim would bolster the weak left. So in a nutshell, Wallenstein's plan was based on the assumption that Gustavus would exhaust himself by attacking the Imperial right, just as he had at the Battle of Alte Veste, where Gustavus attacked the strongest position in the Imperial army. Now Gustavus's battle plan was to have a quick and brutal assault on the Imperials at around 5 a.m. Unfortunately for Wallenstein, Gustavus's main assault was to be directed at, of all places, the Imperial left, which was really the Achilles heel of the whole formation. Attacks on the center and right were really not meant for breakthroughs, but just for pinning down the Imperials long enough for Gustavus to succeed in his main attack. Now when Gustavus starts off, his men are actually deployed to the southwest, facing Wallenstein's far right. But Gustavus decided to maneuver to face Wallenstein head-on, line to line, rather than simply try to roll up Wallenstein's line formation. Now, the good reason for this is that towards the north is Wallenstein's line of retreat to the city of Leipzig. So, if attacked from the south, Wallenstein could simply retreat to Leipzig, which would mean that Gustavus would not get the decisive victory he wanted to achieve. Unfortunately, there was a very thick fog during this time, and so it was pretty bad for the Swedes. So it wasn't until 2 hours later that they actually started to get into position. And then once the Swedish army was in position, there was more fog, so the attack was delayed. Now, at this point, General Kniphausen tells Gustavus to call off the attack, which would have been the right decision considering the Swedes had actually lost the element of surprise, and they didn't actually know how many Imperial soldiers there were, which, if you know anything about war, is very, very bad. So at 11 o'clock, the fog cleared enough for the Swedes to advance. The Swedish right under Gustavus himself attacked the Imperial left under General Holk, as according to the Swedish battle plan. Unexpectedly, though, Wallenstein's trenches proved to be a major obstacle for the Swedish cavalry, who, when they tried to cross it, they sort of became tangled. And then the Imperial musketeers inside were shooting at them. And then everyone was shooting at them, and then there was a lot of casualties. Meanwhile, on the left, Bernard's attacks on Lützen and Windmill Hill were repulsed by the Imperial artillery. In the center, the story was actually quite different, because Brahe's troops pushed forwards, and they actually had a lot of success against the Imperial troops. After a brief struggle, the Swedes cleared the ditch and captured the Imperial battery with assistance from Brahe's troops. So finally, the Swedes, with much delay, began the main assault. And once that main assault on the Imperial left really gained momentum, Hoke's troops began getting pushed aside, and Gustavus was sort of winning the battle. Alright, so I know you all might be getting pretty bored right now, and I might have lost your attention, so to try to get back your attention, I'm going to tell a joke. Alright, so why couldn't Bob drive a truck? Think about it. Why couldn't Bob drive a truck? Now, why couldn't Bob drive a truck? Well, he was a potato. Moving on. So just as the Swedes seemed to have crushed the Imperial flank, Pappenheim arrives with his cavalry. So remember how I was saying before, making a big deal out of it, is Pappenheim going to arrive or not, or maybe. And so yes, he does show up. So at 12:30 he begins his first assault, which goes very, very badly because Pappenheim himself is hit and mortally wounded. Meanwhile, in the center, Brahe's assault was also counterattacked, with his infantry being pushed back to the road. And trying to attempt regain control of the battle, Gustavus led a cavalry regiment on another counterattack. And this counterattack bought time for the Swedes to regroup and restore themselves. And ironically, they ended up entrenching themselves in Wallenstein's ditches. So now Gustavus led the cavalry regiment into a very thick fog, but he never came out of it, which leaves us to wonder what happened to him. In the fog, Gustavus and 3 others were separated from their escort. By accident, they blundered into an Imperial cuirassier unit, and in the ensuing melee, Gustavus was killed. With Gustavus missing and the battle at the stalemate, the Swedes were in total disarray. The Imperials weren't really in better shape either, but the Swedes just lost their general, so it's pretty bad. Gustavus's personal chaplain, Jacob Fabricius, manages to restore order, while Bernard of Saxe-Weimar just assumes command with no one's approval, just his approval. Alright, so before I move on to the next stage of the battle, I should probably clarify the events around Gustavus' death, because this is a very pivotal moment in European history. So when Gustavus launched his counterattack, he took with him the East Gothland and Småland cavalry regiments. Now Gustavus charged so quickly that he left the demoralized Småland troopers behind, and soon got separated from the others in the fog, and was left with only Duke Franz of Saxe-Lauenburg and 2 aides. So as they kind of wandered around in the fog, trying to find their way out, their group encountered a party of Imperial musketeers who shot at them. And though they managed to escape, Gustavus was hit in the arm. Soon after, some Imperial cuirassiers found them, and in the ensuing melee, a trooper named Moritz von Falkenberg shot Gustavus in the back, but he himself in turn was shot off his horse by someone. Now Gustavus's group managed to escape in the fog, but when Gustavus fell from his horse, Duke Franz panicked because he thought the king was dead, and he rode off because he was pretty frightened. One night stayed with Gustavus, who was actually still alive, but he must have been in pretty bad shape, because it hurts if you get shot twice and then also fall off a horse. Unfortunately, another group of cuirassiers found Gustavus, and after killing him, looted his body. Now the Swedish army was very demoralized, and no one was really sure whether or not Gustavus was dead. This event, though, is very pivotal in history, and Gustavus' death really changed the course of the war after Lützen. At 1:30, the Swedes launched a major assault on the Imperial center and left. The left entirely disintegrated, while the center was pushed back, threatening Windmill Hill. Bulak's cavalry drove the Croats off, and Kniphausen's reserves reinvigorated the offensive. Seeing his left crumble, Wallenstein organized a countercharge by a brigade under Piccolomini. In a desperate counterattack, the Imperialists managed to repel the Swedish, who retreated back to the road. So basically, you could say that Lützen was becoming a seesaw battle of attrition, because both sides were making advances and falling back, and no one was really going anywhere. On the Imperial right, though, Bernard's attacks has captured Lützen, and so at about 3 p.m., both sides kind of quit fighting to regroup their men and sort of prepare for whatever moves both sides made next. At around 3:30 p.m., the Swedes began their final offensive, with the unengaged Swedish artillery firing on Windmill Hill, destroying the Imperial battery there. The Swedish infantry followed after the bombardment, capturing the hill. Wallenstein launched several counterattacks by General Colloredo to try and recapture the hill. However, all attempts were repulsed, and by 5 o'clock p.m., Wallenstein decided to retreat. At this time, though, Pappenheim's belated infantry under General von Reinach arrived. Now, remember, beforehand, when I was going over the disposition of the forces, Pappenheim had 2,000 cavalry and 3,000 infantry, and the cavalry arrived first on the battlefield, as they started earlier than the infantry, who were still kind of sleeping. But rather than launch another offensive, Wallenstein used them as a rearguard on his retreat to Leipzig. He did so in good order, and the Swedes were too exhausted to pursue. The Battle of Lutzen is considered to be a Swedish Pyrrhic victory, though some consider it to be a draw. Both sides lost about 5,000 to 6,000 men, and lost irreplaceable commanders such as Pappenheim and Gustavus. While Wallenstein lost all of his heavy artillery and was forced to retreat, the Swedes suffered irreplaceable losses. In my opinion, while it was a tactical Swedish victory or a draw, it was a strategic imperial victory. Now that sounds confusing, but put simply, in the long term, the Imperials benefited more from the outcome of the battle than the Swedes did. So the 30 Years' War carried on for 16 more years. Bernard of Saxe-Weimar took command of the Swedish army, but was crushed at the Battle of Nordlingen. Wallenstein, on the other hand, would be assassinated with the Emperor's approval after attempting secret negotiations with the Swedes. So if that video was helpful, please click like, but it was really helpful, please click subscribe. Alright, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.